Okay, so it's about 7:03. I think we can get started. Doug, would you like to turn on your camera and then advance to the next slide?
I didn't turn off my camera.
Here we go. Well, with that, we'll get started. Welcome everybody to the Stormwater Comprehensive Plan Update webinar and virtual open house. Typically, we like to hold these open houses at City Hall or another location in our community where we're able to see everybody that's with us when we provide our presentations and give information. We also like to provide you with cookies and coffee. Fortunately, we're not able to do that tonight for obvious reasons. So feel free to go to your fridge and BYOB and help yourself. And hopefully we have a good presentation in front of you tonight. My name is Ryan Andrews, and I am the city's long-range planning manager. I'll be the moderator and host tonight for the webinar. One thing I did want to mention before I turn it over to Doug to start the presentation is as the webinar rolls along, if you have any questions, please enter them using the Q&A button of the webinar function. So if you're using a screen, there should be a Q&A button. Feel free at any time to enter any questions you might have. And at the end of the presentation, we will have plenty of time to be able to answer those questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Doug Christensen. Doug is Lacey's stormwater engineer, and he'll be providing us tonight with more information on the update to the Stormwater Comprehensive Plan. So with that, Doug, take it away.
Thank you very much. So this presentation will start with a quick introduction. We'll talk about what it is, why we're doing it, and who's doing it. We'll give some background information on Lacey's stormwater utility and regulatory compliance. We'll talk about the Stormwater Comprehensive Plan document itself, which has three primary components: the Stormwater Management Program, or SWMP, the Capital Improvement Program, or the CIP, and the Financial Analysis and Rate Study. So as you can see already, we have three acronyms to learn: the SCP, the SWMP, and the CIP. After going through the plan document, we'll touch on what the next steps are in the process of this project, and then we'll have a Q&A. So this project is an update to Lacey's original 2013 Stormwater Comp Plan. This is currently available on the City of Lacey website at that address shown. And we invite and encourage you to review it and comment on it. So why are we doing this? Our 2013 plan is 7 years old. Some things have changed and we're due for an update. The regulatory mandates have been increasing. Our capital project plan needs to be updated, and so does our financial analysis to make sure the utility stays solvent. So this project the project team is led by Lacey Public Works Water Resources Division with input by many others here on staff, and our consultant team, which is Herrera Environmental Consultants and the FCS Group. So there are three main purposes and three main driving factors for this comprehensive plan update. First of all, the main purpose is to create a multi-year plan to guide the stormwater utility and all the programs and activities and projects that we do, and we'll be talking more about that. Secondly, is to ensure that we stay in compliance with the regulatory mandates, which are continually evolving and getting more stringent. And then also, which is very important, is to provide information and transparency to Lacey's utility ratepayers. So when they pay that fee, they understand what it's for. The three main driving factors are, first of all, the Western Washington NPDES Phase 2 Municipal Stormwater Permit, which is a mouthful, but I'll just refer to it as the Phase 2 permit most of the time, or just the permit. The drainage system issues, deficiencies that we have, and various project solutions that we need to be implementing. That's an ongoing effort. And then 3, the utility financial analysis update is at the end of its, the 2013 analysis is due to be updated because it's at the end of its program period. So our stormwater utility, we get a lot of rain here in Lacey. We average about 50 inches total depth per year. So if you can imagine, if it hit all at once, that'd be 4-foot depth of water everywhere in town. So that's a lot of water to deal with. And I should probably define stormwater for those of you that may not be quite sure what it is in this reference, but when rainfall or precipitation occurs, a portion of that flows across the hard surfaces like roofs and pavement that we create in a city setting. And it picks up pollutants as it flows across the surface. So this is stormwater runoff. And we, meaning the stormwater utility, work hard to manage all this water to reduce flooding and keep local water bodies clean. So the utility was created back in 1985 to manage the stormwater runoff, and it's been evolving ever since. So we conduct a wide range of activities related to surface water and groundwater quality and preventing flooding and erosion. Almost everything we do is with those major goals in mind. We have a very extensive drainage system here in Lacey to collect the runoff water and convey it via pipes and ditches to treatment ponds and facilities. So there's the construction, operation, and maintenance of all of those facilities. And then many other things that we do as well. You'll see hazardous spill response listed on there. That's just in 2019 alone, Lacey staff responded to 143 spill incidents, which are mostly car accidents, but we have to keep those vehicle fluids from flowing off the street and into the drainage system or local water bodies and causing pollution. Education and outreach. We do many various efforts and events that involve citizens and students and volunteers who learn about and help protect clean water. Many other activities, street sweeping, so forth. Okay, regulatory compliance is a big driver, as I mentioned earlier. It's dominated by the Western Washington NPDES Phase 2 Municipal Stormwater Permit. NPDES being the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. So this is part of the Federal Clean Water Act as it's applied here in Washington. So these permits are issued and administered by the Washington Department of Ecology, and it authorizes the city to discharge stormwater runoff to waters of the state, which includes groundwater. But we have to meet all their compliance requirements. Now, this is a general permit. It's not specific to Lacey. It's a general permit for Western Washington. So there are more than 80 cities and counties that this permit applies to. And the requirements for everybody are virtually identical. There's just a few little differences here and there. This was first issued back in 2007. And it was updated in 2013 with new requirements, including low impact development. That was one of the big changes. And now it's been updated again for the 2019 through 2024 permit cycle. And of course, each permit update adds more requirements that we have to address. So the core stipulation of the municipal stormwater permit is the requirement for cities and counties to develop and implement an overall stormwater management program. That's the SWMP. So the main intent of the SWMP is to reduce water pollution. So in other words, we're trying to keep our lakes and creeks and Puget Sound and groundwaters clean. The SWMP also has to include all of the permit specified program components, which we'll talk about in a moment. And permittees are required to conduct specific actions on a specific schedule, which is also stipulated. So the Stormwater Management Program, or SWMP, has components and efforts that are both ongoing and new. So the ongoing efforts have been going on from the previous permit cycles. So since 2007, we've had these ongoing efforts which continue. But now for 2019 through 2024, there's been new requirements added, and we'll get into more detail on that in a moment. Our consultants at Herrera conducted a gap analysis and needs assessment to determine the effects of these increasing requirements on our workload and the cost of compliance. So that's part of what we'll talk about more in the recommendations of the Stormwater Comp Plan update. So in the Stormwater Management Program, there are 5 primary SWMP components. These are the ones that are ongoing and have been mandatory since 2007. There's public education and outreach, which includes water resource education, student learning, public events where we have booths such as at Lacey Fun Fair, volunteer efforts, tree plantings, and so forth. Public involvement and participation includes things such as this webinar, where we invite your review and feedback on this comp plan. Illicit discharge detection and elimination, or IDDE as we call it. For example, we have you may have seen the curb drain markers, and they'll refer to only rain down the street drain, which is a part of a broad campaign to keep pollutants out of the storm drain system. Controlling runoff from development and construction sites, that refers to construction of stormwater facilities as sites are developed or redeveloped. And then there's operation and maintenance of both public and private stormwater facilities. They have to be kept functional and at full capacity, and the permit requires us to be responsible for that. So now for 2019 through 2024 permit, all of those 5 that I just talked about are still in effect, but there are 3 new ones that have been added to our stormwater management program. So the first one is stormwater planning, and there's municipal storm system mapping, and a source control program for existing development. So each of these components has a variety of requirements that comes along with them that we have to pay attention to. So now our SWMP has gone from 5 components to 8 with these 3 new ones, but there are also other requirements of the permit. I just wanted to mention briefly, TMDL cleanup plans. So a TMDL is basically a water quality cleanup plan for a known polluted water body. So the Henderson Inlet and Deschutes River watersheds both have TMDL cleanup plans that we would be a part of and have required activities. Monitoring and assessment. We do monitoring of water for various reasons, but for the permit, a big part of it is having to contribute to Ecology's regional Puget Sound wide program. So it's a monetary contribution that we have to make every year. And then there's annual reporting. Every year we have to do a compliance report to Ecology, and we update our stormwater management program document and post that on the city website. If you want to know more about the 2019-2024 municipal stormwater permits requirements, you can read the thing yourself if you like. It can be accessed on Ecology's website. If you just do a search for Western Washington municipal permit, you probably find it. So I want to give you just a sample of some of the new permit requirements that are in the new permit that are affecting our staff workload. So on top of everything else we've already been doing, we have to add a bunch of new things, and these are just 4 examples. Under public education and outreach, we are supposed to create a behavior change program for local water quality that uses community-based social marketing. And this has to be implemented by next April. So it's coming up quick. So we're already working on addressing that one. Controlling runoff from development and construction, we need to update our local regulations, and particularly our 2016 Stormwater Design Manual, which is a large document that directs the design of stormwater facilities on construction sites and development. And this has to meet the minimum criteria that ecology has in their Western Washington Stormwater Manual. So that update has to be ready to implement for all new applications for construction here in Lacey by June of 2022. Stormwater management action planning requires a bunch of steps. There's, in general, there's an inventory of your watersheds, an assessment of receiving waters, and then identifying and prioritizing where you would do water quality retrofits. And we have to have all that accomplished by March of 2023. And then there's the source control program for existing development. This is the business inspection program that some of you have probably heard about, but it requires us to develop an ordinance. We have to do an inventory of properties by August of 2022, and then implement the inspection program with an enforcement component by January of 2023. So all kinds of fun. Okay, let's dive into our actual draft Stormwater Comprehensive Plan document. This is what's posted on the city website. I put the address down at the bottom again. The contents, just in general, first of all, this, like I said, one of our goals was to provide transparency and information to Lacey utility ratepayers. So there's some good information here on the utility and our goals, and then activities that we've done, things we've accomplished, on some general information on the surface waters in the Lacey area, land use patterns, the soils and how that affects stormwater, especially infiltration, Lacey's drainage system, and more. We talk about the stormwater management program, since that's such a big key central piece. There's the evaluation of our program and looking at the policy and staffing recommendations for our program going forward. A capital improvement program. This is for our capital projects to address flooding and water quality issues, and the plan describes problem identification, what the solutions are, how we prioritize these things, and then develop an implementation schedule. So we have an appendix that gives detail on that. And then we have the financial analysis, which is not a part of the current document on the website. We have a draft. It's not posted yet. It's under potential revision, but it's coming soon. And that's the other big piece, is how we pay for these things that we need to do. And then in the appendices, there's a lot of good supporting data. If you want to get into depth on some of the things, particularly the projects, there's a lot of good project information there in the appendices. So we're in the modern era, and we're moving away from paper documents more to online content. So we wanted to make this Stormwater Comprehensive Plan, rather than being a thick bunch of paper and text, we wanted to make it a more accessible read, make it useful for our readers, for our utility ratepayers and others who are looking at it, maybe even, dare I say, entertaining as a reference. So there's a lot of graphical elements, a lot of color, The text is kept relevant, summarized, and concise. And there are a lot of local photos that are inserted around there just to make it a little bit more of an interesting read. The recommendations in the plan. First of all, there's an evaluation of our overall stormwater management program, our SWMP. And there's, along with that, the gap analysis and needs assessment, which compares our current programs and staffing levels to what we'll need to meet the 2019 through 2024 municipal permit requirements, which, remember, there's the ongoing plus the new, and so that's all taken into account. The recommendations include adding several staff, maybe 3 to 4 staff positions. That's what's shown in that bar graph on the right. And or outside help to try to meet some of these requirements and maintain our service level. And then the capital improvement projects, CIP projects, excuse me, to solve stormwater related issues and work toward the long-term goals such as flood reduction and water quality protection and improvement. So a major piece of the stormwater comp plan update is the capital improvement program, the CIP. There's a process to determining what projects become part of this program. You look at known problems, you identify issues in the drainage system and what you need to be doing, develop solutions, which would be conceptual designs. And then there are various opportunities and constraints that you have to consider. We work up initial cost estimates, which are also in the appendices to the plan. And then there's a prioritization process where you take into account factors such as urgency and the benefits, efficiency, which would include coordinating with other projects when that's possible. So there's a lot that goes into it. And that process is explained in the appendices. I think it's Appendix D has that. So there are 3 types or categories of projects. The drainage system improvements, which is the biggest part of it. That's the design and construction of improvements for our drainage system. And then we have just a few that are what you would call what we call facility rehabs, regional facility rehab. So these are public stormwater facilities that take water from our drainage system and provide treatment and then either infiltration or discharge to surface water. But over time, those get beyond routine maintenance where you need to, maybe scoop out a lot of collected sediment and, remove excess vegetation, or sometimes you have to reshape the facility because of, sloughing and whatnot. So we have a few projects on our current CIP, proposed CIP, that are regional facility rehabs. And then there are a couple that are related to mandated efforts for permit compliance. These would include updating our stormwater manual and doing what's called stormwater management action planning for future water quality retrofits. So I want to give you a couple of examples of projects that were completed during the 2013 through 2019 CIP. So the first one there on the left, the Lacey Vector Waste Decant Facility, that was an enhancement to our maintenance capabilities. The Vector basically is like a big vacuum cleaner, and we have 6,000 catch basins around the city where runoff from the road goes in. There's a sump that collects sediment, and then it connects to a pipe for the water to flow off. So you have to suck that sediment out of the catch basins. So that's what the Vector does. The decant is, we needed a place to efficiently dump it and get rid of the water before we can process it and dispose of it. So that was one of the facilities that we were able to accomplish on the last CIP. And then on the right, you have the Chambers Lake Stormwater Treatment Wetlands, which was probably our major facility of the last 10 years or so. It's providing water quality treatment to a large area of central Lacey, including a long stretch of College Street, which previously just discharged without treatment into Chambers Lake. So we took that flow, diverted it through a series of 3 wetland cells, and then connected it back into the same outlet pipe so it can continue on its way. So now that flow through system is providing water quality improvement for the discharge into the lake. And both of these, I should mention, both of these actually were partially funded by water quality grants from the Department of Ecology. We actively apply for grant funding to supplement the funding of the stormwater utility. So now in the draft comp plan document, we have a map, which is shown on the left. That's part of it. It's a map showing locations of proposed capital projects for the next 5 years. So you can see they're kind of scattered around town, well distributed. Most of those address localized flooding and water quality issues. And then on the right, you have the project implementation schedule. This lists about 20 projects in the dark green column. And then it has years off to the right there and when these would be scheduled, at least as an initial look at when we think we can do it. So this is based on the initial prioritization and project coordination. The schedule is subject to change. Things happen, urgent issues come up, coordination with other projects emerge, maybe grant funding for a facility that we thought we would do in 5 years. Maybe we get grant funding for that available, so we move that up. And so things tend to be a little bit fluid in the implementation schedule, but this gives us a starting point and a sort of a framework for the projects that we would like to accomplish over the next 5 years and beyond. Our total CIP project plan, as shown here, is about $6.2 million in 2019 dollars. That's from the initial cost estimates. And it's a reduction from what we had in the previous CIP cycle. We're trying to keep a lid on costs. So we've got it down to what we think is a pretty reasonable program. So then there's the stormwater utility financial analysis. We had the financial analysis and a rate study that was conducted by FCS Group, which analyzes the utilities expenditures to determine the revenues required to meet those expenditures. And you have to have some reserves and whatnot. There's more to it than that, but it's an analysis to see where we are and what we would need to do in terms of rates. So the stormwater utility is basically an independent entity. It funds all of the stormwater programs, the compliance activities, the operation and maintenance expenditures that we do, and the capital projects. And these are all included in the analysis. So the utility is supported by the stormwater service fees, which is shown in the red box there on your utility billing statement. You see the stormwater line. We occasionally get calls from people asking what that is. So that's what that is. It's the stormwater service fee for the stormwater utility. It's supported by the utility is supported by those fees. And of course, we have to make sure that our expenditures are adequately covered by revenues, plus some reserve funds. And like I said, there's various policies and financial considerations. But all it takes is a big rainstorm can cause potential flood damage and unexpected expenses. And we do get big rainstorms here with those 50 inches of rain we get per year. Sometimes you get a big pulse and it causes problems. You got to jump on it. So it's helpful and appropriate for the stormwater utility to have a rainy day fund. It was kind of a dad joke, but okay. Our stormwater utility rates in Lacey here, the bar graph on the left is showing that we've traditionally had pretty low, relatively low rates compared to other similar cities in the Puget Sound region that are subject to the phase 2 municipal stormwater permit as we are. So we're trying to keep those costs down, but it's hard. If the expenses keep going up, our obligations keep increasing. So in the financial analysis, the recommendation is to have a moderate rate increase of 4.5% per year, and that's what's shown in the chart on the right. That's our current rate schedule. So the first column has 2020, which is now in effect. For a single family residential right now in 2020, the monthly rate is $11.87. If we went with the 4.5% increase as recommended by the rate study, then our rate in 2021 for a single family residence would be $12.41 per month, which would be an increase of 54 cents a month for next year. And then the other rates for the commercials down on those bottom 7 columns or rows, those are a little more complicated, but everything shown is the 4.5% increase for each year. Now, I should mention that these are recommendations only. These are not cast in stone. The city council approves rates during our budget process later in the year, but this was the recommended rate schedule to meet what we have in the Stormwater Comprehensive Plan at this time. And we're going to proceed with that current comp plan as it's written, but we may have to make rate adjustments. I don't know. It's not up to me, but there may have to be rate adjustments just because of the COVID pandemic and the financial impacts that are happening. So this was just a recommendation. It's not cast in stone, as I said. And as I mentioned earlier, our rate revenue is supplemented by grant funds. And we've been pretty successful in obtaining grants for some of our big capital projects, like the 2 I mentioned earlier. So in fact, we have a grant that right now in effect that we purchased a second street sweeper with. So we're trying to make good use of the funds. And another thing I just wanted to mention is that the stormwater utility is kind of a job creator with our capital program. You know, that's construction jobs, contractors, suppliers, and so forth. So it's a good cause. So the next steps, right now we're in public review of this draft stormwater comp plan. It's been on our website since the 1st of March and we'll be in it through at least this month. So please take a look and comment. I've been to the Lacey Planning Commission and briefed them on this over the past year as this project has been in development, but I'll be briefing them again after the public comment period, and then we'll have a public hearing. I'm anticipating June of 2020 for that. These were all projected dates. Lacey City Council then, the Planning Commission hearing would give a recommendation to the council. Hopefully the recommendation is to adopt it. So I'll go to the council and brief the council or maybe committees of the council and perhaps a work session. I anticipate that being maybe midsummer, and then ultimately adoption of the comp plan along with the rest of the city's annual comprehensive plan amendments. They do this once a year. We're anticipating summer to possibly fall, just depending on how things go. With the COVID situation, the dates are subject to change. So that's about it. So any questions and comments are welcome. Again, the project website where you can find the draft stormwater comprehensive plan and the appendices is listed there. And my contact information, if you want to ping me tomorrow or have a question you want to, or a specific situation you want to talk about, I welcome it. So we're open to questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Doug, for your presentation. I sure learned a lot. I hope everybody else did as well. What I would suggest is at this point, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A section of the webinar, and we'd be happy to pass it along to Doug and get that answered for you. Doug, I've got a couple questions just to start things off for you. First of all, if somebody wanted to comment on the draft plan itself, what's the best way to submit comments?
I believe on that web page we have a comment response link that goes to our water resources inbox. I believe that's there. If not, then you can send it to me directly at the address shown.
Great. Kind of a more general question. If you could point to kind of one thing within the proposed update to the Stormwater Comprehensive Plan that kind of changes our current business practices or when it comes to stormwater, what would that be? And it doesn't necessarily have to be related to the comp plan. It could maybe be related to our new permit requirements or what is maybe coming out of the update to our stormwater management plan. What would you say is the biggest, for lack of a better term, game changer when it comes to stormwater over the next 5-year period?
Well, you know, it's ramping up in a lot of little ways. So it's partly the, you know, death by a million cuts kind of a situation. There are a lot of things that are just kind of get incrementally a little more stringent. In the stormwater manual, which would apply to development and construction sites, our update, I don't think there's anything huge like there was in 2016 when we implemented low impact development as a requirement. That was kind of a big change at that time. I think the changes this time are a little more subtle. We have, you know, ongoing mapping, the planning efforts, which won't affect, people won't notice that so much. It's kind of going to be happening in the background, but it'd be that source control program for existing development is probably the biggest thing they've added, because it's a program, in general, it's a program to prevent and reduce pollutants and runoff at the source from commercial and industrial sites. And then it has a whole series of things over the course of this permit that we have to do. Like I mentioned, we'll have to adopt an ordinance that requires the application of what we call source control practices for pollutant generating sources. So for example, if you have a dumpster that's leaking gooey dumpster juice into the parking lot and flowing out to the street, that's something that we would want to address at that pollutant source and correct that issue. So it's those sorts of things. But we have to adopt an ordinance by August of 2022. So there'll be a lot of outreach before we get to that point. And then we have to do an inventory of sites, the commercial, industrial, and institutional sites. An inventory of ones that, in particular, that have the potential to generate pollutants. And that has the same deadline as the ordinance. That's August 1st of 2022. And then we implement the business inspection program by the 1st of January in 2023. And at the same time, we're supposed to have a progressive enforcement policy in place. And then there's training for staff or whoever is going to be doing all of this work. So we're starting to work on this this whole big requirement. I'm not sure how it's going to shake out yet. We're you know, it's just getting underway. But that's probably the biggest one.
Great. So we've got another question from the attendees, or a question from the attendees. How has the plan evolved over time due to Lacey becoming built out. Because we will be focusing more on infill development as a community, how will our plans change, and how might our capital improvement plans change as a result?
Well, it'll probably shift more toward the facility rehabilitation, like I mentioned, making sure our regional facilities that mostly drain the streets, make sure those are up to snuff and fully at full capacity and functionality. A lot of them are getting old. They get to a certain point where you need to do the rehabilitation, and we did a flurry of projects back uh, you know in the 20-25 years ago age range, and so some of those are probably going to need some attention. We have one or two facilities that are getting added flows. They're probably getting more flows than they were designed for, so we'll need to accommodate that. So there'll be some improvements there, those sorts of things.
Great. Do you know, Doug, are there, that seems like we've accomplished as a city a lot when it comes to, um, some of the older developments, particularly I'm thinking those that had more of a kind of a point source issue associated with them. I'm thinking about like, the Woodland District, the Lacey Midtown that drained into St. Martin's and then directly in the Woodland Creek. That's we've done a fantastic job of making sure that water is now treated prior to its release. Are there any other um, situations in town that are similar to that, or have we addressed those?
Well, we've been trying to address the biggest and worst cases, and we're working our way through them. That's part of one of those programs that I mentioned in the middle of the slideshow back there somewhere, about doing a watershed assessment and receiving waters assessment to determine future water quality retrofit locations. So we'll actually be looking at that in detail. We've got our biggest ones that we've been working on over the last 20 years, and built some substantial facilities to accommodate those. So I think that program over the next couple of years will help provide an answer to that.
Great. So another question. The city's updating its urban forest management plan and tree regulations right now. Can you talk about the intersection of those two plans? Where do they overlap, and where do they have competing priorities?
I'm not intimately familiar with the tree plan, but I know in a general sense that trees are helpful for reducing stormwater runoff. The stormwater, as I defined it earlier, is the part that flows across particularly hard surfaces. But when you have trees, they intercept a good amount of that water. And in fact, actually, that's part of the problem, is that when we remove trees for development, you're kind of altering the overall hydrologic cycle. So trees are good from a stormwater perspective, and I would think that the tree ordinance and the stormwater regulations would work towards similar goals.
Yeah, and I can kind of help you out with this too. The when it comes to infill development, we have a lot of competing priorities because as a community, we're trying to make the transition from suburban to urban in a lot of facets, especially in the kind of older neighborhoods in town. And so, in order to do that, you have to really accommodate a lot on a relatively small piece of property. So, not only do you have to you know kind of infill that through the addition of living units, but you also have to accommodate the stormwater, the rainwater that lands on that property, and how to deal with that, and the current methodology with that is to treat and infiltrate as close to where that individual raindrop fell. So you want to keep that on your site as much as possible. So that kind of compounds issues. And then as well, we have community priorities to try to retain as many trees as possible. And if we're not able to retain the trees, then replanting is required. And so there's a lot of competing priorities, and it makes it for a kind of an interesting scenario on these properties as we infill, and there's a lot of kind of moving parts. So I think here's our last question. Unless I get any others, feel free to use that Q&A button, and we'll be happy to answer any additional questions. If we don't get any additional, this will be our last one. With the new additions to large warehouses in Northeast Lacey, how are you planning for all the new hard surfaces? Is it the landowner's responsibility to deal with the truck oils, etc.?
Yes, our current stormwater drainage regulations in general require any parcel to keep their stormwater on their site and provide treatment and infiltration. So those sites that make a high percentage of impervious surface on their site with a big building roof and a lot of pavement, they don't have much room left to do anything like a storm pond like we used to do. So in recent years, it's been more and more the trend to do subsurface treatment and infiltration. There are a number of different manufactured water quality systems. So they'll collect the runoff on one of those warehouse sites, and it'll go into an underground pipe system that'll convey it to a underground treatment vault, and then from the treatment vault it'll go to an infiltration system. So you have clean water being infiltrated and recycling it back and recharging groundwater. So that water is kept on site.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mentioned with the idea with trying to treat and infiltrate that water as close to where it falls out of the sky from, right on that piece of property. As a follow-up question here, any worries about those new warehouses being so close to a well that's a few blocks away?
Oh yes, it's definitely a concern, and it's something that has been not just the stormwater utility, but our water utility has been involved in the review and approval process for those projects because of the proximity of our drinking water wells. So yes, we're very much aware of that. Fortunately, our wells are generally pretty deep, so there's a lot of soil between the pollution generating surfaces and where the groundwater is taken in by the well system. But yes, it's definitely a concern of ours.
Okay, well, with that, oh, here we go. One last question. Have you seen much use of rain gardens in residential areas for low impact development?
Yes, there have been. I probably don't hear about a lot of them, first of all, because rain gardens don't have to go through as strict of an approval process as what we call bioretention systems. The difference being, by ecology's definition, that a rain garden can be done by a homeowner on their own property to take care of their own little bit of driveway or patio runoff, and it doesn't have to go through a big approval process. We do have guidance for it though. Whereas the same thing on a larger scale we call bioretention system, and that's the formal term for doing a rain garden on a commercial site, where that one has stricter design criteria, the media criteria, how it's constructed, and so forth. So I know that rain gardens are being built by people, and I encourage that. I think it's great, but I don't have a good handle on how extensive it is.
Do you say that more than likely when it comes to residential applications, techniques like pervious pavements are probably more likely, like pervious concrete or pervious asphalt rather than rain gardens?
Well, they're both viable and approvable techniques. Kind of depends on the situation you have. With a permeable pavement, it's more spread out. So if your site infiltration rate is low, um, you can do a permeable pavement, and that pavement is acting as basically as a large infiltration system. Of course, you have to keep it clean, and there are some criteria that go with that. But it's a good approach on certain sites. It's the best approach.
And just so people know too, so when we say pervious asphalt or pervious concrete, that that what that means is that that rainwater is able to actually seep through the pavement and go directly into the ground that way, rather than having to be funneled into a separate treatment system. What I've heard, especially pervious asphalt, kind of mentioned before, it's kind of like thinking about like a Rice Krispie treat. It's a mixture of asphalt that's relatively loose. And so if you think about if you were to pour a drink through a Rice Krispie treat, the water would kind of filter through that. There's other things below that, sand layers and others that help filter that water out. But it's a way for that stormwater to directly infiltrate into the ground as close to where it kind of fell out of the sky.
Right, and it's an evolving technique. It's we don't do it on city streets. There's some issues with loads and with longevity and so forth. So we don't do them on the public streets, at least not yet. But they're allowable on low traffic load, like residential low traffic streets. They're an allowable an approach. And also in parking lots is where they're commonly used, where the person developing the site doesn't want to sacrifice space for a pond or another system. And we have a whole menu of options for how to deal with your stormwater. Your design engineer picks the most appropriate cost-effective solution, and it's one of the tools in the toolkit.
I've also heard oftentimes that one of the biggest challenges for that is maintenance. And one of the unique things about that pervious system is that you actually have to vacuum it, which a lot of people don't have the capacity to be able to get one of those professional parking lot vacuums onto their own driveway. And so what happens is oftentimes those void spaces or those empty spaces within that Rice Krispie treat mixture fills up, and so then the system kind of fails because the water isn't able to go through it.
Right. Yeah,
So I don't see that there are any other questions. So again, would really like to thank you for attending tonight's webinar and virtual open house. We invite you to, if you haven't already, take a look at the Stormwater Comprehensive Plan update. That draft is available on the city's website at www.ci.lacy.wa.us/storm. And if you'd like to provide any review comments, there is a link to do that right on the city's website, or you can provide those directly to Doug, and Doug's email address is on this slide. So again, I would like to thank everybody for attending tonight's webinar, and special thanks to Doug for joining us tonight and giving us all this great information on the update to our Stormwater Comprehensive Plan.
Thanks to everyone for attending and paying attention.
Have a good evening. Thank you.